Hello Summoners and welcome back to another ProGuides video. My name is Nathan and today we'll be discussing underrated picks on patch 11.15. We'll be going over the rooms, the build, and the playstyles to effectively solo carry your rank games if you decide to pick up one of these champions. We'll be starting things off with Poppy in the top lane. Bruisers and Juggernauts are pretty much all that you see being played top right now, mostly due to how ridiculous the strong mythics are. And by that I mean mostly Divine Sunderer, with a little bit of credit to Gore Drinker and, at least before the big nerf, Stridebreaker. In other metas, tanks have been almost able to at least go even in lane and usually outscale Bruisers once it gets Sunfire and Thornmail, but at the moment, Sunderer is just way too OP. You just end up being bullied at every stage of the game, and having a useful engage in fights just really isn't all that worth it. But then there's Poppy, and she may just be as durable as any other tank, but she pretty much just plays like a bruiser. So while she doesn't really take too much damage in trades, she's able to dish out a ton herself. You can also adapt items on her to deal with specific opponents really well. For example, against most bruisers, namely those that do physical damage, you can just build Sunfire Aegis and Thornmail. Both of those items make you tankier against opponents while also providing you with a lot of damage. But if you're against a high HP target like most Juggernauts, or you're against an opponent that can do a good amount of true damage like Fiora or Camille, where resistance stacking isn't really that great, you'll probably just want to go for Divine Sunderer. You can even take the aggressive build further with items like Black Cleaver and Syrinx Gauge. Our meta videos like this one are a great way to keep up with what's going on with League, so you can learn what picks are worthwhile and which ones you should just drop, but that's not enough to climb. If you're really serious about ranking up this season, then you should consider visiting us over at ProGuides.com. We have courses from all of your favorite streamers and pros like Core JJ, Aframu, and Xsmithy to help you really understand how to play your role. And if you want a more personalized one-on-one experience, our top tier coaches are available 24/7 to help you anytime that you want. Whichever option you choose, stop spinning your wheels on your own and get on the fast track to higher elo today. Now let's get back on topic, shall we? Our second underrated pick is Malzahar top lane. Malzahar is a champion that I've considered a strong pick for basically forever. The only drawback is that he's incredibly boring, so if you guys want the free LP but you hate yourself, then he might be the pick for you. He doesn't really win or lose any matchups, he just totally neutralizes the laning phase. Then once you have an ultimate, it's a guaranteed way to get kills with your jungler. He has insane scaling with both huge damage and the ability to lock down fed carries and divers with his ultimate. Players started to catch onto this a few patches ago, and Riot responded with some nerfs, but they didn't really change much. He's just a really solid pick. But he's also been always played in the mid lane. All the things that make him great there also make him a really strong top laner. In fact, he may be even better in this role depending on the matchup, since it's a bit more difficult for top laners to gap close compared to the more mobile assassins that get played mid. Also, top laners in general have a much weaker wave clear than mid lane champions, so it's much more difficult to match Malzahar's pushing power. A bonus for picking him top over mid is that it leaves mid lane to a champion with more early game presence. In the current meta, early game means a lot. Malzahar is definitely strong at making plays with his ultimate, but aside from that, he's pretty useless in early fights. The one caveat is that with top lane being longer, you are more vulnerable to being ganked if you push to the enemy tower, but as long as you constantly push in the waves all the way, and then back off, then well, you'll be fine. Looking now at the jungle, the first champion that we'll be talking about is Vi. This may sound like a stretch, but she's kinda sorta just a bit like Malzahar, in the sense that you don't really have to interact too much early, but as soon as you have your ultimate, she comes online. Most of your early game will be PvE. You'll clear camps, rushing to level 6 you can go ahead and get guaranteed kills with your ultimate rather than wasting your time trying to gank beforehand. Now all of this isn't to say that Vi is weak early. It's just most of her damage is in her Q, and it's not really easy to land unless that target is super overextended. But if it comes to a fight between you and the enemy jungler, Vi can hold her own in most matchups, especially if you're in a bush and your opponent face checks that with the fully charged Q. She's also one of the best champions for taking early game dragons solo, and even if you have laners that don't have prio, she can go ahead and sneak over the wall and take it before the enemy gets a chance to. She follows a pretty basic gameplay pattern in the jungle. Just farm up camps when your ultimate is down, and then ultimate a target as soon as it's up. But sometimes in League, simple is best, especially when it gets the results as consistent as Vi. Our second underrated jungler is Morgana. After her initial jungle focus buffs earlier in the season, Morgana was an insanely strong pick, but after those direct nerfs and a shift to the strong early game champions, she has fallen off hard. But that doesn't mean that she's just off limits in this role. She's just more of a situational pick. You'll have a tough time against certain champions like Xin Zhao and Kindred, but Morgana absolutely destroys matchups where she can take full advantage of her black shield and her Q to shut down their engage. Quite a few picks fall into this category, but to name a few, Zac, Rammus, and Vi, who we just talked about, struggle to find anything useful to do in these teamfights. Picking a strong early game champion like Lee or Xin Zhao means that you should always have the advantage in the jungle. If you can close things out early, that's all you need to do to win. But if you have hard losing lanes, you may end up falling off if the game drags on for too long. Those aforementioned champions outscale you in a 5v5 teamfight, and all your early game work means absolutely nothing. But with Morgana, you have a guaranteed scaling for the late game. On top of already blocking off their engages like I mentioned, Morgana is also a really strong team fighter herself, with her ultimate providing a ton of damage and disruption against enemies that try to dogpile into the fight. And she's not limited to just all-in fights. While she's not your typical artillery mage, she's really strong at sieging. Her QW combo can easily do over half of a carry's HP on its own, and with the root lasting basically half an eternity, there's plenty of time for an ally to follow up and kill the target. But you know, this is solo queue, so I wouldn't plan on it. Next up for the mid lane, we'll be starting off with Karthus. Even in his prime as one of the best junglers, Karthus has always been sort of a hidden OP pick as a laner. Believe it or not, that's where he started. His scaling is just so high that sticking him in a solo lane to soak up XP is a guaranteed way to be a major late game threat. He has tons of wave clear, but you won't really be using it to get priority. Karthus roams aren't exactly stellar. In fact, Karthus can't really force anything at all. You can't even force trades on your opponents in lane. But they can't really touch you either, and you'll be running exhaust, so all their attempts to all in you will just kind of result in a free kill. Even when the summoner is down, you should be able to trade back a 1-for-1 with your passive. And with the aforementioned ultra scaling, you should be more than okay with that. When it comes time to 5v5, your ability to just blanket the enemy team in your defile and wipe them out will have a bit more of an impact than whoever you're laning against. Our other mid laner for you is Lee Sin. Riot really wanted to shake things up in the jungle meta, so they buffed the early game junglers as a whole systematically. But at the same time, they thought that they should also give an individual buff to Lee Sin, cutting his E's cooldown from 10 to 8 seconds on the very next patch. But rather than making him a stronger jungler, this had the unintended effect of people realizing just how strong E-Max Lee Sin was as a solo laner. He became an incredibly dominant pick in both solo queue and competitive play, and Riot thought it'd be a good idea to tune things back a little bit. First, they added back 1 second, then the other one, restoring the cooldown to its original 10 seconds, but still he continued to be OP. Basically, Lee Sin would have been OP as a solo laner the entire time, just no one really thought to do it with an E-Max beforehand. Anyways, they then went on to nerf the damage on the ability, lowering it from 260 to 220. This almost seemed like it would hit Lee pretty hard, but honestly, he's just as strong as before. Even with losing 40 damage, you outshove most laners with ease, and they can't really contest you on the wave, since no mid laner really beats Lee Sin in a 1v1 fight. As far as our build goes, if you're not super confident in certain melee matchups, bone plating can be taken over shield bash. Moving things down to the bottom lane, our first underrated ADC is Affilios. Despite everyone memeing Riot for the 200 years thing, Affilios has statistically never really been that good for solo queue, outside of players at the top of the ladder that actually know how to use him. Anywhere under that, he's basically always been very low on the ADC tier list. Basically, he's the Kali of the ADCs. After being pretty much nerfed into the ground, even the pros dropped him. But now, after several small buffs, Affilios is back on the radar. He's one of the most popular picks for bot lane carry in pro play, but just like before, he's still statistically really weak in solo queue. But that doesn't mean he's objectively bad, he's just a really hard and difficult champion to play. In a role where pretty much every champion's primary focus is to position well enough to both avoid damage as well as deal as much damage, also having to worry about comboing with different guns together just isn't easy. In fact, to put it bluntly, most people are just bad at it. Hey, the stats show it. But when you actually know how to cycle through your useless guns and get the optimal setup for each situation, things start to change. You'll be able to carry fights hard, with the ability to pretty much nuke the entire team when you're wielding the right guns. Like I mentioned, Affilios is just one of those champions that completely dominates pro play even when he's statistically a bad pick for some of us in solo queue. So often, we see champions like him get nerfed hard when 99.9% of the player base can't even use him right. I have mixed feelings on that, and I want to hear from you. Aside from the whole Aurelion Soul thing, cause that's a given, really? Why nerf Aurelion Soul? Anyway, I'll never understand Riot, even though there's so many other broken champions. But today's question of the day is, do you think it's right for Riot to balance certain champions specifically around pro play? Tell us your answers to give us a little bit of insight as to why you feel that way down in the comments. Now, let's go ahead and get back into the video. Our other pick for ADC is Quinn, and man, she is super underrated, and probably for a good reason, but also maybe not. Her play rate is practically non-existent even in top. Her main lane and ADC is way more rare. Yet on pretty much every single patch, she has a positive win rate. That's probably because one person is playing her and going positive. I don't know. Even with a small sample size, if a champion is always doing well, then it has to mean something, right? Right? Due to her short-range, scrappy nature, if you have to play her passively, odds are you're not going to win the lane. But when you do get to play with an aggressive support, you can bully out about any other bottom in the lane. Not only does Quinn do a lot of damage with her bursty trades, but she also nearsights her opponents, leaving them unable to even trade back. And you're not just limited to using her cooldowns and then running away. With the attack speed that you get from proccing her passive, your DPS is fine even in extended trades, so you can commit to all-ins as long as your support is on the same page. Plenty of other ADCs are strong early, but Quinn has one thing going for her that none of the other ADCs do: her ability to affect the rest of the map. Sure, Ashe has her global ultimate, but that has a long cooldown. Twitch has his stealthy roams, but he'll probably just int, and if he doesn't get anything, he just runs the risk of missing out on some farm bot lane. Quinn's ultimate gives her movement speed to just roam up and down the map freely, with high probability of pulling off ganks on opponents that just barely overextend mid, or maybe just joining your jungler for a surprise invade. If you roam up and there's nothing to do, you can just probably make it back bot lane with your ultimate without missing much, if any, farm. Now for our supports, the first champion that we'll be talking about is Vel'Koz. The go-to mage support lately has been Syndra. Her ability to smash lane and then carry fights has made her pretty popular. She's even one of the only champions that you can consider to counter Lulu. And while she's definitely the best champion in that class, she's not the only one that works. Vel'Koz does a lot of what she does, but it's just harder to execute, mostly due to the unorthodox nature of his Q. But if you can master the geometry behind his poke, it's equally hard, if not impossible, for opponents to dodge it, even behind minion waves when you can find an angle to chip away from them. And you guys said that geometry was useless. Still kind of is. With the right angle, he can also poke away from further than any other supports can reach. Basically, your goal is just to be a thorn in the side of whoever has to deal with their constant Q barrage. But Vel'Koz isn't just limited to poke. His whole combo and his ultimate does a ridiculous amount of damage. Usually in lane, most bot laners will focus the ADC, but if they do when you're playing Vel'Koz, you can easily wipe out both your opponents with your lasers. He scales super well out of lane, being able to quite literally eradicate the entire team in a 5v5 if he can position well enough to land a good ultimate. Finishing off our list, we have Syndra. Yeah, this is a bit of a cheesy pick, but still, anything goes when you're talking about underrated champions. When it comes to finding a champion that works as a support, the main thing that you're trying to look for is what they can provide that actually makes them a support. And for Syndra, you can just pick up cannons and deny your ADC because you're probably not going to hit them anyway. Soraka and the other enchanters provides the same, a bit of poke and usually some peel. Leona and the other tanky CC Latin supports give kill pressure in lane, and they have engaged for team fights. The mages that work as support generally provide poke that allows you to chip away at the enemy and some form of CC that lets you just disengage. Syndra comes with mage poking power and disengage abilities, while also having the kill lane threat that all supports do, thanks to her ridiculously hard-hitting combos. With a recent buff to her Q's mana cost, you can spam Q pretty heavily, giving good poke and helping out your ADC push the wave. And when it's time to fight your opponents, your QE gives a hard-hitting stun that can set up for a kill for an aggro ADC, like Tristana as soon as level 2. If you don't have the damage for kills early, once you hit 6, you certainly will. There's nothing about Syndra's support that makes her do less damage than Syndra mid-early game. I mean, you're lower level than a solo laner, but so are your opponents. With your full combo, you can basically one-shot squishy supports and carry on your own. So you can just spoon-fed your ADC every time your ultimate is off cooldown, or take all the kills yourself because the only person that you could trust is yourself in solo queue. Yeah, I've been hurt a lot. Anyway, the one thing about Syndra's support is that it is pretty snowball reliant, but plenty of champions that are popular in the meta are as well. So as long as you can do well early, you can just keep one-shotting those squishy champions that you can reach. Just make sure you don't fall too behind in levels, and you'll always be a threat. That wraps up everything for our underrated picks on patch 11.15. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure you sub so you never miss out on any of our meta guides. Remember, let us know what you feel about balanced round pro play down in the comments below. And one last thing, don't forget to check out our Discord in the description as well, where you can go ahead and discuss League further or just hang out and be a part of the community. I can't wait to see you guys back in the next video, but until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.